But with that, I will turn it over to Ann Meeker to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will. And thank you, Code for America, for hosting. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Good afternoon for those of us on the East Coast. My name is Ann Meeker. I am formerly of Code for Boston and a former government partner on the Windfall Awareness Project, currently the Tech, Science, and Data Program Director for PopVox. And I'm really excited to be moderating today's panel on service as a service, partnering on old problems in government, nonprofits, and health. I'm sure everyone here who's ever worked with a brigade knows that two of the biggest challenges are finding the right problem and then finding the right partner, not necessarily in that order. And some of the questions that come up in that process are, when is government the solution and when is it not? How do we right-size the solution when the problems feel so insurmountable, especially as they do right now? So today's speakers are going to share some perspectives on problems and partners with a range of experiences from inside government to partnered with government to partnered outside government, but doing government adjacent and government parallel work. So I am the least interesting part of this presentation, so I'm going to let them jump right in. Just a note on logistics. If you have any clarifying questions on each of the speakers, please go ahead and drop them in the chat, and I will just pose them to our panelists in between the speakers, but let's try to save general questions for the end. And I think we're going to have a lot of time for our Q&A at the end. So with that, whoops, give me 1 second. My screen share is doing something odd. Okay, let me introduce our panelists very quickly. First, we have Etha Cow, Senior Civic Innovation Specialist for the City of Pittsburgh. Then we're going to have Jason Anton, Tech Lead with Code for Baltimore. And finally, Michael Chow, Co-Director at Code for Philadelphia. So with that, Etha, how about you take it away?
Thanks, Ann. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today, and I apologize that was me secretly screen sharing. So yeah, my name is Etha Cow. I am the Senior Civic Innovation Specialist at the City of Pittsburgh, and that doesn't actually tell you what I do. But today I'm very excited to be sharing the government perspective of working with tech experts like yourselves. So I had some fun with this because I don't normally get to make fun presentations for work, but I really do resonate with Parks and Rec, honestly. So I've been working with for local government for about 6 years now. Started at our water authority and then worked in consulting with our sewer authority. Worked in the mayor's office for about 3 years, and now I'm based in the Department of Innovation and Performance, which primarily does IT work, but I do all of the external partnerships and a lot of program management. And I'm a member of the Code for Pittsburgh Brigade, which actually my friend Melinda pulled me into because of fish fry. There's an annual activity where our brigade gets together and then maps out the prime locations to get delicious fish fry, because we love that here. So I think one of the big lessons, as honestly a non-tech person, but working with a lot of technologically savvy and very genius people, is that a lot of times I get approached for brand new apps. And I think my favorite example is one of my really smart friends was like, Etha, I have the solution to homelessness and it's an app. And I'm like, no, it's not. So I think that the lesson here is, don't recreate the wheel, because that's kind of why government exists. And I know everyone criticizes government for how slow moving it is, but that's because we're kind of under capacity, especially now, and under resourced. The city of Pittsburgh, we're facing up to 30% budget cuts because of COVID. We're looking at this problem across the nation. So I think that the realization that a lot of these equity issues that I worked on when I was in the mayor's office, like food insecurity, digital equity, the digital divide, even structural racism, a lot of these neighborhood level issues, these are structural things. So I think what's key to understand is that you have to understand how your government is structured first. And what that means is that who is responsible for what. So this is a map of Allegheny County, where I live. So the little gray thing in the center, that is the city of Pittsburgh. And I'm using Pittsburgh as an example because that's what I know best. But we are very unique in the county because there are 130 self-governing little cities, municipalities within the county. So even though I work for the city proper, we are not actually responsible for all of these things that are listed. So for example, human services is the whole county region, the larger gray area. Public safety, permits, parks, like that is the city. So our, Parks and Rec department I work pretty closely with for a few years. The Water Sewer Authority, as well, where I used to work as well, that, is responsible for the city. And then there's also the Allegheny County Sewer Authority, which is the larger 130 municipal government. And then vacant land housing, that's another municipal authority. Planes is the airport authority. Buses is the port authority. Parking is the parking authority. And schools, Pittsburgh Public Schools is self-governing. So Pittsburgh is very unique and a little bit different from a lot of other cities where they operate based on something called a unified jurisdiction, which means that there's one big government entity that's responsible for, if not all of these things, many of these things. And Pittsburgh is split up. So that's secret number one. Secret number two is that every single governing agency has an operating budget. So you can just go in Google, look up your city or municipality, and then operating budget 2020. So what this will tell you is that if you are approaching your government, this is your homework side. So you can understand everything in the operating budget, like local government is transparent almost to a fault. But on the left, you can look up the governing structure. And so you can kind of understand, like some departments will call it innovation and performance, IT, whatever you have it. And then you can kind of see which team and narrow it down which team you should be talking to. So like I work for I lead the civic innovation team under the IT department. And then to the right is a very well mapped out just budget. So you can find out everything from how much my salary is to how much we're spending on pencils. And if you have a tech solution or a tech idea, this will help to narrow down what region you should be focusing in. So for example, like the orange piece is the majority of our spending, and the green, of course, is personnel and salaries. So if you have something that really sparks your interest, this will help to guide you on your path. I love Parks and Rec, so I have to use this example. Forget the Ron Swansons of the world and talk to Leslie Knope. And what I mean by that is that Ron Swanson is technically the director of the department. But he, in the show, just eats a lot of bacon. And Leslie does all of the kind of ground level work. And I'm not saying that that's relevant to all government systems, because some government systems like ours, I feel like is more of a Ron Leslie hybrid, where you have the representative person who's very outward facing, for example, the city of Pittsburgh mayor, who I worked for very closely, Mayor Peduto. He's very visible, he tweets a lot, he's on social media, he does a lot of kind of forward facing work, but he may not be as familiar with the day-to-day workings of what's actually going on and be able to pinpoint what challenge you can help on. And I think approaching from a problem first model is what is so important. So, I have a lot of feelings about what we could fix at the local government, but also being able to recognize that as a tech professional, oftentimes, like there may not be a full understanding of what the actual problem is at the government, or actually which one would be possible to work on and which staff member would be able to give you that time. So for example, I use this within our smaller discussion, but the city of Pittsburgh, we have 3,000 employees, and we have one software engineer, and he is amazing and does great work. But in that sense, like his time is primarily taken up doing the work of more than one person. So, is it necessarily a good use of your skill sets as brigade members, or his time really to come up with something that's not truly a problem that he really needs to deal with? And I think a second thing, of course, is keeping the solution maintainable. So I think another thing with government, and I'll go into this spiel as I talk about PGH Lab, is that a lot of times government, we're more than happy to work on innovative solutions like, yes, that's awesome. But oftentimes, especially if it is something that's run by volunteers, unfortunately, if there isn't a government person that's the champion or working on this day to day, it's not super maintainable if you just kind of create a project and it's great for 6 months, 10 months, and then someone else at the government has to maintain it. And unfortunately, that can create kind of a narrative where government's not as willing and open to work with tech professionals, which brings in my personal program that I run for the city of Pittsburgh, which is called PGH Lab. So it's the Pittsburgh's urban government incubator for startup companies. So this 6-month program just launched, newly launched, runs for about 6 months with local tech startups to test pilot their services and products with us, as well as many of the other local government agencies. So the 6-month period is really because government can take a while to process, structural, governmental, legal documents. I won't go into the fun stuff, but that is really because, we do serve the public, and so we have to ensure that every single word in that legal document is accurate. So for an example, in terms of the problem first model, which I've been changing it a lot more to, for example, this project that doesn't seem very big or like amazing actually is but mapping neighborhood streetlights. So we did work with a company last cohort that was able to map out the locations of streetlights in 3 different neighborhoods. And that doesn't seem, that wow, but it actually is, because we hired third-party contractors to install the streetlights, and there was just kind of this old Excel sheet that was floating around. So we knew that there were streetlights on Grant Street, but where on Grant Street? So we needed the locations, the material, the height, when they would be maintained. It's all very important information, because if you're talking about public safety, there's lots of research that's linked to more car accidents, more violence in areas that are not as well lit. So that was about a 5-month project, believe it or not. And a lot of that is because there was a lot of work done on the tech side to be able to drive around a self-driving vehicle and use LiDAR 3D mapping technology to get this information. And in the end, that was very helpful for my colleague who worked in my department to be able to add on to the information and the data that we have. A second company that worked with us was one that provided translation services. I think especially now when we're moving digital, we really see that divide. But a lot of government websites and materials that we distribute are unfortunately not in language necessarily. And in Pittsburgh, we have been seeing a huge influx of immigrants and refugees who do not speak English as their first language. And so we want to try to serve that. And in that pilot, we were able to identify kind of which departments would need that help the first, because translation services are expensive. And having been a professional translator, it is a lot of work. And yeah, a lot of government agencies are unfortunately unable to provide all the resources to be able to hire those companies. So 2 city level problems that have been addressed for this cohort are, where are the broken sidewalks in Pittsburgh? And if you've ever been to Pittsburgh or any other, older city, this is an issue because of accessibility. And then where are the ADA ramps? And what is their condition? And then the second one is that local government, a lot of times, we get a lot of flack for working slowly, but it is, again, because we just are understaffed and now even more under-resourced. And because of that, we've seen a huge shift and acceleration during COVID of governments shifting to online platforms, e-documents, but that still means that a lot of departments are using paper and pencil. So these are 2 of the big challenges that startups will be applying to for this cohort. They are not paid. And that is really because the value that we provide in working with a lot of these startup companies or people who have concepts is that then they have a solid case study to then shop around to potential customers and then hopefully be able to get contracts down the road. So that is me, and I will hand it back off to Jason.
Awesome. I'm going to steal moderator privilege to jump in for a second and say thank you, Etha. That was really fascinating. Just question for other folks in the room, just if folks want to dump any experiences into the chat here. I'm really struck by hearing that that you guys are facing 30% budget cuts in Pittsburgh for COVID. Anyone else working with local governments? Have you seen any direct impact? Have you heard anything from your partners on how COVID budget cuts are going to impact you? We'd be really curious to hear about it. Maybe that's something we can talk more about in the Q&A later. But also just kind of ending on that I love that idea of just the things that sound really small can have such a huge quality of life impact. And I know that's something that Jason wanted to really kind of draw out. So Jason, over to you.
Thank you. I will share my screen. All right, can everybody see pretty much the same slideshow that Ethan was showing? Yes? So yeah, I'm Jason Anton. I'm the tech lead at Code for Baltimore. Before I really jump into this, I also kind of wanted to give a little bit of context that I also work as a contractor on a Center for Medicaid, Medicare Services contract. I've worked towards modernizing some of the federal government systems for Medicaid and Medicare. And that kind of experience is relevant to what I'm going to speak to here. And I'm going to take what we talked about just a second ago and take it from more of a technical perspective and take it a little more literally with, biting off what you can chew, making the problem smaller, but also making some of the solutions smaller and more piecemeal. So, and to keep with the Parks and Rec theme, Ron Swanson wants all the bacon and eggs you have, but in civic tech, you may not want or need all the bacon and eggs a restaurant has. You may just need parts of a solution that can come together over time. You may need an API that can deliver certain information that you can consume in another service. And then later on down the line, that API could be used in something else and then in something else. It's not all about getting you're better off getting something smaller out the door that can do some sort of real good immediately than trying to cobble together this gigantic project that's going to solve all the world's needs. Ethan mentioned a friend of hers that wanted to solve homelessness with a mobile app. Well, mobile app doesn't really seem like it could, I don't know, I see how that could help homelessness very much, but maybe it could. But what parts of it specifically could help homelessness? Let's hone in on the parts individually and try to flush those parts out iteratively over time. Instead of trying to get it all done at once, really try to make your problems as small as you can and then put them into 2-week sprints from a technical agile perspective and try to iterate over your solutions and get where you're going. A lot of times in civic tech, especially volunteer civic tech, folks want to jump in and they're very skilled, they're very highly skilled, they're very passionate, and they would like to solve all the problems. And they conceptually may have ideas on how to solve all the problems, but the ability to solve the problem in general isn't the issue that stops a lot of these projects from getting to the finish line. It's availability and time. And I'll touch on something Code for Baltimore has done in the COVID response in a little bit, but the only way to really get larger efforts across the finish line from a largely volunteer workforce is to really kind of take it a piece at a time. And to do that, you want to define what your minimum viable product is for your solution. You found a problem that's small enough that you think you can come up with a quick solution for. You've broken that solution down into small chunks like an API, the data part, the front end part, and you've really identified, I can build the database in schema and plan all that in 2 weeks. I can plan the UI in 2 weeks, and I can build the API in 2 weeks. So, 6 weeks from now we could have a finished product. So you've done all that, planned it all out. But that's great. That's the first step for what your minimum viable product is. But what you should also start doing at the beginning is identifying what your minimum viable product won't do. Because again, a lot of passionate folks like to jump in and help with civic tech projects. They care about their communities. They care about the solution that you're trying to solve. So tell them in advance, look, we're on the clock. Let's skip adding, the gold plates to gold plating, as they call it, to the project. Let's get the minimum done, and we're not going to do some of these other things. You may, the developer or the idea person or whoever may want to do some of those things. That may be something that they look at and they think it's a good idea and it'll be neat and it'll be fun, but try to stay focused on what the absolute bare minimum is going to be, and then take that iterative approach. The phase 2, maybe some of those items from phase 1 that weren't part of the MVP, that were in that, we're not going to touch that now. That's phase 2. Those are the minimum viable product items for phase 2. It's important to distinguish that early on, because it keeps you focused and it helps you get across the finish line. And, part of that conversation, and I don't want to, read the bullet points literally, but part of that conversation about what the minimum viable product is versus what you're not going to do is prioritization. Looking at the list of features, looking at the problem itself, and prioritizing what the response is going to be. Sometimes some things that may not seem like they're obvious in a minimum viable product have to exist so for the product to work at all. So you'd have to work on those in the minimum viable product, like the database design, for example. You may have to spend a little bit more time on the database than you'd think to really plan it out and get it to a state where it can grow and it can scale. But that may not be obvious. You may want a more flashy website at first, but which is a more obvious thing. But check your priorities, I guess, is what I'm saying there. Iterating. I've said that a couple times now. I can't stress that enough. Both in the Code for Baltimore projects and the projects that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of in my day job with Belize Technologies and the Center for Medicaid Services. We have these big problems that we're trying to solve, but we break it down to microservices or something that we can really iterate on. We can build a piece here and it's completely independent of a piece over here, but they come together to form a finished product later down the line. That might be developing an API that can drive certain calculations, that can take in certain variables and figure something out and deliver kind of a calculated result. And then the other side of that is kind of a web form where you can enter values and then calculate that result. And that's something that you can't do if you take a monolithic approach to the problem solving here. If you're trying to build your server and here's your database server and here's your web application server and you kind of have to get to a certain maturity point before the product can work at all, and that might hold you back. So if you take that iterative approach of paying attention to, like, maybe I can make this an API over here that's serverless using Lambda, or I can Dockerize it or something like that. And I don't want to get too technical in this discussion, even though I'm a more technical perspective here. Try to not just break the problems down as small as you can, but even the solutions. Microservices can really help you scale and really help you. They can really help you develop a piece at a time without having a requirement of building the whole server first. If you don't need a server, then you don't have to worry about that part, and you can get right to the meat of the problem that you're trying to solve. They can be flexible, and they can be kind of confusing, microservices, and breaking everything down too small. So the one caveat I would warn you about is just that it can get labyrinthy if you rely on that too much. So there is a balance that has to be found in every project where, some of it can be done in microservices and broken down into small chunks. And then there comes a threshold where you say, okay, now I need to bring it all together maybe in one application so that it kind of makes sense to manage it in the long term and to sustain it in the long term. And with that said, choosing the right tools is vitally important for your project. A lot of coders will come in and they'll want to, reinvent the wheel, but that may not get you to your MVP as fast as you want. A lot of data analysts, I'm sorry, my dog's pulling the curtain open, so that's probably making the lighting weird. A lot of data analysts will just go straight to Excel for their data needs. And as Bart Simpson has learned, Excel is not a database. So while Excel might be great for them to work individually, it really kind of kills collaboration efforts in a lot of ways. And the ability for other applications and things to reference the data and take advantage of some of the hard work. So if you're going to break the problem down and the solution down into microservices and to make them small, take the time also, part of that prioritization conversation, start thinking about what tools may not be, the tools may not always be the coolest tool to use. Sometimes Excel is the perfect solution, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're going to be comfortable with a certain solution like Airtable or Tableau or React or Vue or something like that. And sometimes you're not going to be comfortable with a solution that presents itself, like using, I don't know, Vue or React or Excel or NoSQL or something. And if you have to learn something new, that's good for everybody, right? Like Civic Tech is a good opportunity for a lot of us to learn something new and try to get something across the finish line, depending on the urgency of the project. If the project has some urgency to it, I would suggest maybe not try something new. Maybe stick with a technology that you're more familiar with, even if it isn't the picture perfect solution for the problem that you're trying to solve. I believe that's the last of my slides. Yes, that's the last of my slides. But I did want to quickly go over an example of what I'm talking about here with something we did for Code for Baltimore. We put together we worked with the City of Baltimore Health Department to come up with a way for them to check in on senior living facilities during emergencies such as COVID. And we were unfortunate enough, because this has been a very horrible thing that's happened to us all over the past year. We had some time to kind of sit and build a thing from scratch. If we didn't have time, we might have used a more traditional CRM or CMS package like Drupal or something, I don't know. But we had some time to sit down and really try to build out a product using microservices. We have a front-end product that we built, and I have a local version of it running. We have a back-end product that we built completely separately as an API application that I also have running locally. And this is a good example of, we broke the problem down into smaller chunks. We have the API piece, we have the front-end piece, and we could have different teams kind of working on each solution. There was requirements between them, but that's where your communication is key, and keeping everybody on the same page and planning things. That initial planning step is very important to make sure everybody kind of is aligned and heading toward in the same direction. If you're breaking things down into smaller chunks, we put out the API, we put out the front end, and we were able to, all of our code is up on GitHub, and you can see we have these two separate projects here. Be More Responsive is our API. Healthcare Roll Call is our front end. You can see we have a little bit of activity here. And I'm going to break with the Parks and Rec pop culture reference here for a bit and switch over to The Simpsons. But here we have the Healthcare Roll Call, and these projects come together. Don't worry, I'm showing you fake local data. So Homer Simpson can log in, and here we have a product where Homer Simpson is able to call the Leftorium, talk to Ned Flanders, and fill out a COVID response form to see if Ned's business is okay, if they need masks or if anything like that. And the City of Baltimore can use this product to check in, as I said, on elder care facilities and ensure the facilities are safe. They're doing well. And the way we were really able to pull this all together was by breaking that problem down into, the city was originally using spreadsheets for this. The problem with that was it didn't allow epidemiologists easy access to the data to work together to come up with a triage plan or a response plan to the disaster or the emergency as it was. Breaking this down into smaller, more manageable chunks let us do some research with the city and talk to the people that would need to use the data, talk to the people that would enter in the data. We could have our front end team focus on the aesthetic here, focus on where the buttons are going to be on the page to help the end user, while the API team could focus more on the functionality of the back end and the data schema and that sort of thing. And there wasn't a lot of there wasn't a lot of wasted effort there. That sounds not completely different than, I guess, a more traditional monolithic development environment, and it isn't completely different. I would say just that the keeping it simple, the old KISS adage, keep it simple, stupid, is kind of the too long didn't read of my presentation here, and it worked in this case with Code for Baltimore. I can say that it's worked in very well with the federal government trying to modernize some of the old Medicaid, Medicare systems, and it can work for your project as well. I know that it can. I can't get back to my slide. Oh well, I'm going to stop sharing. Thus concludes my portion of the thing. Back to you, Anne.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jason. And you may have mentioned this, but I wonder if I can just draw a detail out from you that came up in our discussion. You mentioned when we were talking before this, how much this costs to put together. Could you share that again?
Sure. So the development costs, we're talking about volunteers, right? So a lot of my time was free. All my time was free. But the implementation of like a small scaled down microservice-based architecture-based solution, we're talking about less than $50 a month for microservices. If you want to do a major ECS kind of Dockerized implementation of this code that we have here, you're looking at a tops of $150 a month, and that's if you really set 3 servers to run all the time to scale and all kinds of stuff. So we go more traditional or monolithic applications might cost a couple $100. For Salesforce I don't want to speak for Salesforce, but Salesforce is very expensive. This is, like I said, can be less than $50 a month for your city. $15 a month, I think, is possible. So very, very inexpensive.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I wanted to pull that out because it just, again, with the brigade model, there are obviously some interesting ethical and operational questions about volunteer labor and how does that fit into a city budget and what a city can expect from its civic tech community. But that's still, in this moment where city budgets are so strained, I think it's fascinating to look at how much you guys were able to do with such a small amount of resources besides obviously your skills and time. So that's really incredible.
Yeah, and,
awesome.
And just to add one more anecdote to that, like our project in particular, that's what the cost is coming to, largely from the data-driven requirements. But there's plenty of other situations where you don't necessarily need a full-blown SQL database, and you can run on pennies a month some of this stuff. The API portion of this costs less than $5 a month. So it can be very, very cost-effective.
Awesome. That's great. And that takes a lot of creativity too. It takes a lot of creativity to figure out just how do you, what resources can you bring to bear that are actually going to help as many people as possible? And I know the answer to that is not always government. We've focused here on government so far, but I think Michael is going to get into some places where the solution might be government adjacent or government parallel. So Michael, have you go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Let me share my screen. Okay, let me zoom through. All right, I think we got it. All right, thanks for letting me join this panel. I'll be talking a little bit about this idea of service as a service from the perspective of connecting nonprofits and volunteers. A lot of this has been developed with Marika Jackson, who's the other co-director at Code for Philly. And we've really, over the past couple years, worked really hard to focus on nonprofits as partners, both to learn and to build with them. All right, so one big question is why nonprofits? Oh no, I don't think, in this, I don't know if you could see this GIF isn't playing, but there's a person playing the American photo player. So it's a strange, complex instrument where you pull knobs and levers to hit drums and cymbals. And I think that what I think of is that we need someone who could do this. They're playing a weird orchestration of a bunch of simple parts, right? But incredibly, it's easy to see something like this and think it's a silly, inefficient instrument, but actually something very incredibly innovative is going on here. I think one person is doing the job of an orchestra. And I think that to me is there's always someone in a nonprofit doing this. It's like, one person amazingly wrangling a million things to deliver direct service to people. And I think that's what we got to do. We have to learn what this person's doing, how they're innovating, and how we can support them to get to the people on the other side. So I want to talk about this story. How can we connect with this person and learn from them? And how can we offer service to support them? So I think one example from Code for Philly that I think of where we've been fortunate is in the legal domain. So this is something I've focused a lot on over the past couple of years and learned a lot about. So a couple of years ago, Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity emailed us, and they had a project they wanted to work on around criminal record expungement. So we documented their need and their use case. We threw a project kickoff event, and through this process, we learned a ton about criminal expungement and the work they do. And we learned that, like a few people here at this organization are able to do a lot for the communities in Philly. We learned that they're using like a single app that legal organizations use, one app, Expungement Generator. And that app actually helps a bunch of different organizations. When we threw the kickoff, we were able to connect with community legal services. So a person from CLS came to the event, and when they saw the volunteers, they realized there was an opportunity also for them to start a project. And as we just went down and as we pulled that thread, we learned more both about the legal domain, but also we're able to start projects to connect them with volunteers. And so recently we also connected with Philadelphia Bail Fund to work on similar work, actually parsing dockets, court dockets, and reporting on them. And I think it's a really important journey for us to both, as we bring in these organizations, we learn more about the domain and we become better at offering up support and volunteer services. So that's an example of kind of pulling the thread to find partners and learn about their problems. I think another nice approach that Marika demonstrated last year, or I guess earlier this year, sorry, it's been a long 2020, was, so rather than pulling the thread, it's fanning out. So Marika started a relationship with Prevention Point, a needle exchange in Philly, and she really worked to understand their problems and who they were serving. And then Marika saw an opportunity to create a hackathon around opioid data that they had. So this put us in contact with Health Federation, and then we worked with a number of meetups like Our Ladies and Data Philly to create an event. I think what strikes me is that the event ended up really fanning out. So the projects that came out of this event spanned a whole range. So there's one very related to the event called Matchmaker that some volunteers from the event ended up continuing. But there were also collaborations with our meetup partners. So Our Ladies Philly, we found out that Carla, an organizer at Our Ladies Philly, was volunteering at Paws, an animal shelter. And from there, we were able to kind of chase down that project and start a collaboration with Our Ladies and Paws. And what's really helpful there is we already had a Paws volunteer, Carla, leading this organization. And so Carla and Chris at Paws are very in tune with what Paws needs. And I think that to me is this idea of service as a service. We have the people who know the levers to pull, right? We have access to volunteers. We just need to figure out the right way to connect them. Similar Data Philly, the organizer works for UPenn. And so we ended up collaborating on a COVID-19 dashboard for hospital capacity planning that just fell naturally out of his team's need to do that at UPenn. And because we knew them, we were able to kind of help springboard and make it a like open source project and offer support there. And I think I want to get at what I want to get at, the kind of big picture zooming out, is that this isn't just a set of collaborations, it's really a network of relationships. And as we've gone on over the couple years, I feel like I've been really fortunate to learn a lot about the legal system and to have friends and now colleagues, right, at these organizations that we can ask tricky questions to. And they can refer us to organizations and identify needs. We're all in Slack, right? we're just a big Slack bag and we can just shake it and like connect people and get advice. The last thing I want to highlight is Marika, incredibly, so these are like a lot of collaborations. Thinking small, Marika got her car repaired and she went to Philly Auto and Parole, and there she saw that they do tremendous local community support. And so she saw like a big opportunity there to help a small, like single person organization or 2-person organization help in their local community. And I think that's something we want over the next year to really figure out, is something, this might not even involve us building a product, right? Or any tech, we might not even code, but how can we as technologists support organizations like Philly Auto and Parole, who are just people in the neighborhood trying to provide support, and they've been there for like 2 decades. I think if we can help them, that's where we can really make an impact. So we love working with nonprofit partners, and we're excited to talk more about our experiences and challenges, but also to hear other people's experiences. I should say non-governmental nonprofit partners, but we partner with government too. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. That is so fascinating. I love seeing the maps of all the connections. I think some of you know this, but my last role was working as Director of Constituent Services for a member of Congress. And we used to talk all the time about the convening power of government and how that was sometimes the only lever of power we felt like we had with Congress the way it is. And it's interesting thinking about that as kind of a soft power role that brigades can play in bringing community together to get things done outside of government also. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
Thanks.
So thank you so much to all of our panelists. This was so fascinating. I really appreciate you all sharing your experiences here. I am going to continue to just steal my unlimited cosmic power of being a moderator, to steal the first question for myself for all 3 of you, which is, I think something that's kind of come up in all 3 of your talks is this kind of mutual education idea, that how can brigades help governments understand what's possible? How can governments help brigade members and civic tech folks understand the structure of government and what's possible and what's not possible? And then how can, with the nonprofit piece and this kind of journey relationship mapping, how can brigades help all of these different groups connect to each other and understand the landscape in a community? So can you all kind of comment on that? Just what's the role of a brigade in kind of that mutual education, that educating your partners, that being educated by your partners? Just want your general thoughts.
This is Jason. I'd like to comment on something Michael said that relates to what you said here. Sometimes I think the brigade's role isn't necessarily to write the code or to implement a solution. We as technologists, it says code for Philly or code for Pittsburgh or code for Baltimore. Code might be in the name, but we are technologists. We're tech savvy people or tech aware people. So I think a major role of the brigades is to offer maybe a bit of training here and there, but also to help identify proper solutions as they're brought forward. We understand the government side, we understand the tech side, so we might be able to be uniquely poised to say, you don't want to use a database this time. This time you want to use a spread, Excel or something like that. And I think Michael touched on that really well in his previous his slides.
Yeah, this is Etha. So I really loved hearing about Jason's product. And then also, Michael, I so feel heard. That instrument, that one person playing that wonky instrument, I'm like, nonprofits, even though they're nonprofits, they're very similar to government. You get a bunch of maybe 2 people thrown together to do the work of an entire orchestra and no training. So, oftentimes, I think the role of brigades, to kind of echo Jason, is to be support. And I think to answer Barb's question, I think it's really, it is really tough to build relationships and approach local government. Who do I talk to? Who's the right person? And I think they're already there. So I think about it because I serve on, some volunteer boards, et cetera. I look at it like a job, right? So whenever I apply to a job, what do I do first? I Google it, I look on Wikipedia, I kind of narrow down these are the top 5 people that like I want to work with. And then I usually look up their teams because a lot of times that, you know, like the most visible people are not actually the people doing the work that can identify the problem. In Pittsburgh, we have solid partnerships with our universities. So I think, you know, this is relevant everywhere, where universities, usually they're like IT classes or, you know, their master's level programs, they usually do some sort of like a program or like a student project with the government. So usually that professor is a good connection. And then I think in terms of your elected officials, like we're seeing that everywhere, but every single municipality has either your local council person, I would recommend that, your mayor, if that's more appropriate, but usually you want someone who is neighborhood centric. Whereas like the mayor and the county executive are usually like, you know, they're kind of the face for the entire 90 neighborhoods in Pittsburgh and 130 municipalities in the county. So it's kind of like, you want to narrow down, do you want to make this a geographic location project, or do you want to make it an issue-based project? And so like you kind of need to figure out that. And then once you get that first interface, one thing that I found that works, even as a government employee, like people are like, new ideas, innovation, like I don't freaking care about that. Like I need something that will make my life easier. And so that's the question that I ask. You know, I'm like, you know, first of all, like I get it, like we're facing all these budget cuts, you know, AI is not even in the conversation. It's like, what would make your life easier? Is it some sort of a database? Is it something to improve the processes? Is it a tracking system? And I just kind of leave that in the air, and then I listen for like 45 minutes. Because chances are these government employees or nonprofit people have been working with the same old that's, you know, outdated, antiquated technology. And it's just because of funding that we can't get it.
Yeah, I think maybe to dovetail off that too, we think a lot, like to the degree ETHA has like accumulated all this knowledge about like the just various workings in government stuff, like an important role there is for us to really like listen and absorb. So ETHA doesn't have to repeat like a million times to every person, like the kind of like all these connections that we can to a degree kind of like learn about these connections and then interact right with people in government so that they're not constantly having to like repeat themselves right to volunteers and things like that.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Mercedes, did you have a follow-up question on approaching local government? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, actually, I just did that this morning. I approached Senator Allen here in California because he asked that I was looking through my email to figure out where did I see his request for input. And I didn't find the email, but I remembered that he has a Facebook page. And so I was just looking at that. In any case, he asked for input for a meeting that's coming up on the 20th. And I suggested, all right, I sent him a query regarding, is there any idea that he could think of where Food Oasis could help identify pantries in Northern California, because the organization is reaching out to Northern California, so they desperately need help because of all the fires and everything. So hopefully you get the gist of what I said to him and he'll respond. But what I discovered in relationship to what we're talking about, how do we reach out to government to interact with them? They're on Facebook, you know, and they want us to talk to them. And some of their goals are spelled out, and it could be that simple at times, or just approaching them through that resource and letting them know that we're out here and what we can do. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for reaching out, and good luck. I hope you get a great response back.
Yes,
That's
so do I.
wonderful. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm aware that we're coming up on time, but I know we had a kind of placeholder question from Leonie. Leonie, are you ready for that question, or you want to?
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome.
Thanks, Anne.
Awesome. Yeah.
I wanted to ask folks on call, our panelists, but also just everybody here, what advice you all have for proposing paid work to a partner. And so I know Anne made a reference to kind of the moral and ethical questions of paid work, but I'm coming from a dirty word business perspective of if we value digital services, if we value providing work that's good for our neighbors, then, and if we want that to be sustainable, then we should have some sort of price affixed to it. Otherwise, these partners subconsciously might think, oh, we can always plumb this wellspring of volunteer labor. And so for context, we have worked with the elections division for the Texas runoffs in July. And we're thinking that we want to do a similar process audit, kind of like the design audit we did for nationally, but a process audit of how one becomes a poll worker for subsequent years. And I just don't even know how to pitch that in a way that partners would be, or rather this particular partner, the elections division, would be receptive, considering the precedent of like, we've always been volunteers, but your process is has a lot of friction to it, and we can audit it, and you all don't have people power because you only have 3 staff members. So all of these concerns that I have.
Yeah, Leonie, I think I have some perspective that I can offer on that. So I showed the healthcare roll call product that we put together. We put together the API portion. You know, obviously it's an open source project that was free, that, you know, free for the city, free for everybody to use. But there was, in my mind, there was always kind of a business angle to it. Because I'm more, in a lot of ways, I'm more the Ron Swanson of the group. Not just because of facial hair, his is better than mine, but also because I think sustainability is a big question, and I think there has to be a private sector government partnership in a lot of this. There has to be a way forward where, you know, people can have jobs from the outcome of this, or the economy can be stimulated or something like that. So with our project in particular, with healthcare roll call, the project is free. You can fork our code and you can use it however you'd like. But if you would like it implemented for you, then there might be a business that can provide that service, that can provide the hosting and provide tech support, that sort of thing. So the code, the solution to an extent is free, but the implementation, or not to a certain extent, is very free. It's very open source. It's very, very out there. But if the city needs somebody to implement it for them, then they'll have to partner with a local business to get that part done. Because then we're talking about somebody actively interacting with the product to make sure that it's stable and to make sure that it serves the city's needs. Now, healthcare roll call, that's a gimme. That we put that out there as a COVID response, and we had a great local partner with the company I work for in Belize Technologies to help contribute some of the necessary investments to get the project all the way to where it is now. But long term, the API portion particularly could be forked by any other municipality or any other branch of government and used as a contact management system or a CRM system for them in any other way. And to implement that, that's where a business would step in and do that implementation for that municipality, for that branch of government at a cost that would have to be, obviously negotiated between the parties. So the product would always be built on from an open source free platform perspective, but the implementation of support of, premium service perspective, that is what you would be charging for. That is where the business aspect of this comes in, I think. Because then you're saying, here's a solution that can solve your problem. you can use it for free. Please do use it for free, solve the problem. But if you need some help that's above and beyond just us giving this to you, then we can talk, and you know, I got to eat too, so we can talk business at that point. I hope that shed some perspective.
It did, thanks.
So Liani, I also have a response. So I actually am also a small business owner on the side. So I also understand, you know, the challenges of building something for free. And then, you know, all your customers are saying, oh, we'll just help you promote, and then not pay you for your work. So I think, at least with PGH Lab, the government incubator that I run, the idea is that companies will, you know, approach 2021, they'll have a solid pilot test case for 6 months. And then some of the companies have gotten contracts with us in the future. So it's more just like, understand that, you know, yeah, government's going to be strapped for cash now, but in general, you can make money by working with the government, but government's less likely, like anybody, to purchase something if they haven't seen that it works. So I think like having that solid test case is what matters. And I think no elected official or city is going to say that they don't support entrepreneurship. You know, I think that's really the movement of every single city in this nation. But yeah, I think I agree with you. The auditing and process needs work. And honestly, if a government wants it, they'll find ways to pay for it. So for example, even though we're facing big budget cuts in the city, many of the small special projects at the city are funded by nonprofits, are funded by our local universities, are funded by corporate, right? So I think like if there is a need and it's proven that there's a need and there's something that actually fits the need, then yeah, government will shell out the big bucks.
Got it. Thank you so much.
I'd like to comment as something that might sound.
I really apologize, but we are right up at time. Hang on one second. Will, you said there's not a session after this, but I know you had an important announcement for everybody on scheduling. Can we maybe do that announcement right. And then hang out here for 5 more minutes?
Yes, so there is not another session in this room right now, but there is another session starting right now on priority action areas, which is a really central way that the Code for America network organizes sort of our priorities as a group. And that'll be an opportunity to participate in that decision making and that thinking. It's a great way to sort of harness the network-wide people power. So I encourage folks to join that one as well.
And well, you might have said that, but which room is that in? Where do folks go for that one?
Oh, so that's the only thing happening in this hour we're just going into. So if you go back into Kiko chat, you'll be able to get into that PAA session.
Great, wonderful. So yeah, would definitely encourage folks to go over there, but if folks have any final wrap up thoughts, I know I can stick around for another couple of minutes. I don't know about our panelists. Guys good for another 5? Okay, yeah. Awesome. Michael and Mercedes, I think you were both saying something at the same time on Liani's question. I don't know, I leave it up to you two, which of you wants to go first?
About getting paid to do what you do? Right. Oh, I'll go first. It's a little abstract because it just is. But basically what I wanted to say is that during the time I was looking for a job, I somehow got connected to the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor. And they kept sending me emails saying that we have funds to pay for somebody that can do this work. And then they would say what kind of work they wanted done. A lot of times it was training people to do things. And I cleaned out my computer. I don't seem to have that in my system anymore, but it's definitely the Department of Labor, and they do reach out and look for people to do things. You know, it's kind of like other government agencies where they take bids. I don't know if they take bids or just want people to apply, but they reach out also to have people come and work for them.
That's great.
All I had to say.
Thank you. Michael, you wrap up point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm less experienced in this area too, but I think maybe I have a radically different view. At least we've been taking for the last couple of years is that we've had big plans before and wanted big systems and projects, but I feel like it just really like gums up the gears or can go for a long time. So I mean, we've really tried to draw kind of a line in the sand and just focus on like small, really low hanging fruit and see even the question of like, who will maintain this? Do we have to pay someone for this as a like really important signal that, that the idea is getting really big, and that can have a big impact, but there's so much low hanging fruit. There's like so many, rather than one big city size problem, there are like 100 neighborhood size problems out there, and none of those require paying someone. A lot of those have a person willing to, or right now actually spending time doing the work. And so in my mind, it's been a really important cue for us to think about like, can we go down? Can we like go smaller? Can we find a person like Philly Auto Patrol just working in their neighborhood? And that's mostly just the space we're operating in right now, and some of my like lack of familiarity and expertise with like a more paid model. But it's been helpful for us, and nonprofits like the highest praise we ever received was a nonprofit paid someone to run their Code for Philly project. And that was a really healthy sign to us that nonprofits have money, they can pay, right? If it's worth it, they'll like pay someone to spend a little time. And that's a really powerful cue for us, how complex the solution and how broad it should be.
Thanks, Bill. All right.
Awesome.
A lot to think about. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Well, thank you again to our panelists, Etha, Jason, and Michael. This was so fascinating. Just round of Zoom applause for the work that you guys are doing and for taking the time to share that with us today. And thank you to Will, Code for America, for hosting. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of us are on Slack. If anyone else has any follow-up questions or wants to connect with any of our panelists here to hear a little bit more. But with that, I think we'll end here and encourage y'all to head over to the main session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Drop my email in the chat, please. If you have any questions, please do reach out.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.